Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. My guest today is Matt Karazin. We talk about his approach to technical interviews, what to look for while interviewing for an early career role, and what traits he's looking for in a junior engineer. Great. All right. Well, we are back. Matt, the ball is in your court here. Let's move into the technical portion.
Great. So the problem I picked today is something we gave at my last startup. So I think I gave this problem about 3 to 4 years ago, and we were hiring for a junior backend engineer. So it's focused on APIs.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually not a coding problem. It is more about breaking down a specification and planning out your development work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, especially with interviewing more junior candidates, I haven't found much value in giving them coding problems.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the way I've asked it, but I just haven't gotten that much value out of it. So I focus more on trying to validate what sort of knowledge they have and what sort of knowledge gaps exist.
Mm-hmm.
And also, how do they work, and what are the fundamentals of their work style, right? So this problem, maybe we should show it and chat through it a little bit, right?
Great.
So the problem statement here, and I guess I'll just read it out loud. Mega finance company offers a finance tracking application to users on the iOS and Android app stores. Users link their bank accounts, and the finance tracking application automatically pulls in all transactions from their bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
The application shows the users the transactions and offers insights and summaries of their spending, such as total spent this month and total spent on groceries. A new feature of Mega Finance Company's app is to allow users to add transactions manually. Users have asked for this feature for 2 main reasons. And then underneath that, your task as the person doing this interview is to write the MVP specification for this feature.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you scroll down to the next page, and we can go back up to this in a second to do questions, right?
Yeah.
But you'll see here, I'm asking for a few things. So what sort of data collected? What is the API input? What is the API response? And then on the second page, what is the data model? And what is your plan to accomplish this? Mm-hmm. So it's a lot. And as a junior engineer, it's hit or miss for people getting parts of this or even all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how I've offered this is either remotely, we do it, kind of like we are today, or they come into the office and we sit in a conference room together. Mm-hmm. And I give them about an hour, and they can use the internet. They can use any person that's in the room. If it's me, if it's another engineer giving the interview, where there's resources. And I set the tone by saying to them that they're not expected to finish every question.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And as you got probably from the gist of that, the questions really focus on many different areas. Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm evaluating in one of those questions is more about product sense. Mm-hmm. As this company that we were doing the hiring for, it's a finance company. So I'm trying to figure out how much financial knowledge they already have. Mm. I'm also trying to understand if, as a small company, if they can collaborate with product and designers to iterate on features, right? Mm-hmm. Other questions get at how much experience do they have building APIs. Other questions get at how much experience do they have with databases. And the last question gets at how do they actually plan their work and get it done, right? So there's a lot going on in this question. And again, we don't expect people to finish it all. But that's another part of it is where do they focus on, and do they focus on quality over quantity or quantity over quality, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think makes a lot of sense, especially when you're talking about trying to get a better feel for what can someone actually do, right? I've had a couple people on the show do more. I don't know the best way to describe them, kind of systems design type interviews, right? Asking questions, how would you actually build something, or how would you do this, right? And I think that does give a much better picture of what someone knows. And probably the scary part is the interviewee is, what someone doesn't know, right? And you're like, oh, I don't really know how to handle this part at all, because right now at work, or if you didn't have a job, I just haven't done that very much, right? Which is useful to know, especially if someone's coming into a role where that might be a big part of their job, right?
Right. Yeah, and what are the gaps in their knowledge? What can we support them there? Where are they going that we want to help them get there?
Yeah, and you said you also have used, this is one type of technical you've done with more junior engineers in the past, and then another version you've done also.
Yeah, I've done quite a few through the years. I particularly like asking people to bring me work they've done before and doing a code review of that work with them. Particularly for people coming out of boot camps, they've got a portfolio, and I think it's great to recognize their portfolio and to let them show off the things they're proud of. And it's also something that they should be comfortable with, right?
Yeah.
So asking them to do a mock code review with me really helps me understand how much they actually understand the code they wrote. And evaluate their coding ability through their own work, right? It's really unfair, I think, especially for juniors to throw them in and say, solve this problem that they've probably never heard of before, and sink or swim, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So if we're looking at this problem, we can set let's say a 20-minute timer or so, and then that way, not the full hour, but you can make some progress on this. And the goal, basically, the ask are these 4 questions. I'm going to look quickly if there's any of these 4 that I think maybe I might be able to make the most progress on, or am the most familiar with. Data model, data use. As you were describing, I realized, I think I'm very familiar with this type of application, because I think I was a user for a number of years. Okay, so the data should be able to enter when adding a manual transaction. Okay, I think that's something I'd certainly have a number of ideas around, is the data we should collect. API endpoint, document the API endpoint, data manual. Less familiar with actually building API endpoints, but just to make sure I'm in the right path, it's like we're sending like some type of JSON to a file path, or to a URL path, and getting a response from that. Like, that's basically all you're asking here, and what would that look like?
Yeah, and the scenario here is that we've got a mobile app, and the user is going to use the mobile app, and the backend needs to get that data.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Making some notes. JSON data. And data model and storage. Okay. Great. So to make sure I understand fully, our application already tracks automatic spending or automatic updates, right, to their bank account, but we want to create a function that allows users to add the transaction manually with the idea of maybe they don't have to link their bank account, which makes sense. Some people might not want to do that. And then to add transactions that occur outside their bank account, such as paying with cash. Okay, that makes sense. So just to make sure I'm 100% clear, if I'm on this application, I can add the idea I'd be able to add $5, cash transaction for can of soda at the store, and then put that into our big financial application, and then that'll show up just like all the rest of my transactions.
Right.
Okay.
And if we were summing how much you spent for that week, $5 more would be in that summation.
Great. Okay. Great. And I think that's basically what you've said here, right? Similarly, the sushi restaurant, $24 paid in cash. What's this add? Paid rent, 950, not link the application. Okay. Great. So data that would need to be collected, things that seem immediately obvious to me would be amount, right? What is the amount that basically was spent or transaction? Maybe transactions amount might be the right way. Transaction amount or whatever we're going to call it. I don't know how this application works 100%, but I guess I can ask, is there I'm assuming it lists some type of information around that that they would be able to add manually. So there's probably some automated system that grabs whatever the often financial, it's either the processors themselves or like the businesses, right, would have some type of ID associated with them or some type of name associated with them. But we could just upload whatever they would like to that.
Right. So, with these manual ones, we're starting from a blank slate. We've got none of that automatic data that we'd get if you used your credit card. Yeah. Right. So what do you, this is kind of a twofold here. What do you think is we need to, from a minimal standpoint, right, to make this functional, but also what do you as a user want to see?
Yeah. I would want at least like a transaction name. I'm trying to think of the right, basically like if it's a restaurant, right, the restaurant's name.
Yeah. And so maybe you want to fill in that data so we can see that, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. 50 here. This is sub shop. Right, so we've got this. That's manually entered, the title of the place. I would think we'd also need some type of, if we're entering it manually, some type of description might be nice. I don't know if our automated platform would have a default description, but it might be nice to have some information that we can add along with that. Okay. So when they're looking back at manual ads, there might be, maybe they just added Robert Sub Shop, but then you could add some type of transaction description. And I denote these with transaction name would be required, transaction amount would be required, transaction description would not be.
Nice.
So it seems like an extra added thing. Should have said if it makes sense to have basically where that transaction would come from, right? If it makes sense to say cash, I mean, because in our examples, you've paid from a check or you've paid from cash. I guess description is kind of a catch-all for that, but maybe that's nice to have as well.
Yeah, like how you paid for it, right?
Yeah. What do you call this? Transaction. I don't know a good term for it. Transaction denomination or let's say form. Right now, it's not a great term, but cash, check, outside, or maybe non-linked account. Right, it would be one of those.
Right.
Which also seems to me like maybe an unrequired field. That seems like bare minimum to me. I'm trying to think of what else. When I'm seeing a financial, I mean, we need transaction, basically time, just date information.
Awesome.
So we have something that could be auto-generated for them, and maybe they can edit it if they'd like. I'm trying to think of what else is important when I'm looking at my credit card balance sheet. Yeah, I mean, I think those would be the main things. You said so this would be a thing where, Googling is involved?
Oh,
Or
yeah,
can be
totally.
involved?
I mean, you can use anything you want.
Let's see. I'll do a quick check and see if there's anything else that's, glaringly obvious as far as data points on my Chase transactions that
Yeah, and I tend to let people in an interview use as many resources as they can because that's what work is like, right? We want people
right.
to be resourceful.
Yeah, those seem like the bare minimum is date, description, type, amount, and then if it updates a balance. But this wouldn't be. So, okay. Because this name would be what I would call that name. Looks like, maybe major financial institutions call that description. Let's say this is notes.
Nice.
I go type here. Okay.
I like that change because I think you're giving a little bit more meaning to what notes are for.
Right. Right. And it's a thing that seems like it wouldn't be involved. I mean, you're not going to automatically have notes. And maybe you want to add something, especially if you only use this feature every once in a while, right?
Yeah. I particularly like your change from description to notes. What about your change from name to description? How do you feel about that one?
Well, description makes sense to me because I guess when I see those things, I'm just thinking of what is this like in real life when I see those things come through. They're usually not Robert Subshop. It's like Subshop Chicago and then some other weird stuff that if I really want to figure out what this was, I'd have to go Google it, right?
Right.
And oftentimes it may not actually be the company itself. It's probably for a situation like Robert Subshop, it would be just, credit card purchase from some non easily identifiable thing. So description makes more sense to me than name because it's not actually probably the name of the place. I guess so if they're manually entering it, we could set up the idea that it would be the name of the place. I think this would make it more aligned though with what we might have coming in.
Okay, sounds good to me.
From an automated perspective.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's a clear answer between that one. It was just more, how do you see the world, right? And how do you view these two?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Those seem like the core data points. Do you think there's anything that I may be missing that is important?
No, I think we're good to go forward.
Okay.
We can always kind of come back and talk about some of these in more detail at the end.
Yes. Great. So if we're talking about building our, just on the data model and storage, I don't build a lot of database schemas myself, but I would use either MySQL or Postgres just because it's what I'm familiar with, and they're relational. I think I could build something like that if I had to, and I would have something like probably transactions, dates, times, all of these types of things would likely have their own field within that schema. But I don't want to focus a ton of time on that because I think I could get lost trying to just describe all that.
Right.
So like I mentioned, I haven't built as many of these, but this is my idea, is that if we're talking, we're sending some type of data, the input would be basically these same fields, right? Is what we would be sending. And if we were using Rails, a format would be different. But does this make sense to you as far as how to structure this?
Yeah. What do you think though about like the HTTP method and the URL for this?
HTTP method, again, I think I'm not super knowledgeable. Let's make it secure if we're going to be doing anything with financial transactions. Are you, yeah, I guess, what do you mean by that particularly?
Yeah, so I think what you were getting at might be HTTP versus HTTPS, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. With APIs, there's different ways you can call it. Like when we're on a website, we're always, for the most part, using something called a GET request, GET, right? GET.
Right. Yes.
And that's to fetch data, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. So I would call this a post request because we are trying to enter a new piece of data, right?
Yeah.
I'm assuming we could also. Sorry, go ahead.
This is fantastic. I mean, we talked before about getting stuck, and I didn't give you the answer, but you went from, in my mind, I was like, okay, Taylor doesn't even know what get post is, right? Mm-hmm. But as soon as I said get, you wrote post, and that lets me know that you have more depth in that area than I originally thought, mm-hmm. right? And we worked together to get there. So yeah, great way to get unstuck.
Great. Yeah. So these are post requests, and then well, then I'll now show my lack of that knowledge. There's another one too, basically, that maybe is more common for editing something. It's.
Hey, at least you know that there is another one.
A patch. So I would say if we're going to take an existing thing and then edit it, then we would use that request instead of a post request, so we don't have duplicate requests. But I don't think that's really under the ask here. It's just to add transactions rather than to edit them. So okay, and URL path would be big company / let's go some type of maybe user ID, and then trying to think in the terms of routes, what this would look like, what we're sending it to. Which would rely on whatever we call the method.
Right.
But I
So that
would say,
looks okay
Phil,
to me. There's so many different ways to do this. But what
right.
about that last part, the transaction ID?
Yeah, I guess thinking of how do we denote that this is a new thing coming in? We'd basically be passing in that value.
So I'm not sure you need to specify that here.
Mm-hmm.
By making
Right.
the post request, you're already telling the API that you want to create something.
Mm-hmm. Right, and we're not going to have a specific URL or endpoint where that's going to have the ID if that ID doesn't exist. This is just the ID for creating a new manual transaction. If that makes sense.
Right.
That we don't need to put that there. It does make sense to me. User ID would be in there at some point.
Yeah, we need to identify who is creating this, right?
Right.
So you have to put that data somewhere in this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes sense to me. I mean, these other data points, I would put in, again, the syntax of this isn't great, but I would put in these other data points, right? This, I guess I can say like this I think we could just pass as an integer, right? This likely be passed as a string.
Mm-hmm.
The date time, I think it can generate. I would also pass it as a string. State, same with transaction type. I'd pass as those other two I'd pass as strings as well.
Awesome.
I'm trying to think what other parameters would we need, or I guess what else would we be looking for here?
So I think you've covered what the minimal correct set of information is, right? Of course, if we were working to build this together, we'd refine it a couple times, right? And we'd make small changes to what you have here.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, you've captured what the question asked you to capture. So, overall, I think that's like a good enough answer.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of nuance to this question, though, right? And you could go a lot further than you currently are.
Mm-hmm.
And you could also do a lot less than you currently did and not have a satisfactory answer, right? But I think you're already at the point where we've got a decent enough answer for what was asked of you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, what else with our remaining time here? I guess what else would you advise folks maybe in this type of interview to be aware of or looking for? I guess I didn't do this part at all. I plan to accomplish. So maybe reading the question better.
So are we at 20 minutes?
I think so. Yeah, we're right there.
Yeah. So, if you were given an hour here, you could probably fill in the rest of them to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
So overall, that's good. There's a lot of nuance to this, and I think, I should ask you, how do you feel you did?
Fine. I think if I was interviewing myself, I would be like, okay, he knows what a post request is, and maybe the basic structure, could probably Google his way through sending something correctly to an API. And
I ask a lot of questions. Maybe those would be the highlights. The lowlights would be not super knowledgeable about databases, maybe a little shaky about APIs, and didn't write anything on plans to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, with enough time, you probably would have hit all of them, right? I think, you did have pretty good answers, right? And that you demonstrated to me that you have prior knowledge in most of these areas, right? You've done a little bit of database work, right? You have a little bit of understanding about how APIs work to get post in there, right? So there is some knowledge that you have that if we were to hire you, we would have a good foundation to then build from there, right? I think for other people, if you get a problem like this, there's a lot of facets. That first question is actually more about product than it is about technical, right? So, I think you focused a little bit much on the technical side of that, right? Like, I loved that you said this is required, right? But that might have been almost more appropriate for the API question, but still okay to put it there, right? But and I don't want to venture too much about you because this was such a short thing, right? But another candidate might come in and they might focus a lot more heavily on that product side. What does it look like, right? What is the UI maybe even that we would have a small little mock-up look like, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for certain engineers, you might flex there, right? You might say, I do really connect with the product and I'm going to put in a lot of effort into that one question. Some other engineers might be much more focused on organization and how things get done. And they might put a lot of effort into that plan section, right? And other engineers, they might be more, security and technical thinking, and they might put a lot of effort into validation of data. That was one thing you didn't touch on at all, is like, what is valid input, right? Besides string versus number, right? So there's a lot of facets of this question. I would give you, in an absence of no other people taking this question, a pass, right? I would say that you've demonstrated enough on those various areas, some financial knowledge, some API knowledge, and I think in 60 minutes, you would have accomplished a lot more, right? But overall, if we interviewed 4 people in this, it would be tough to know where you might line up with those other 3.
Yeah. I think having it be, I think it's a great question because it is so multifaceted. It allows people to kind of showcase what they know they are stronger at, right? Which is something that I think has been a theme in this show, is how much technical are people looking for in this question. And I think it's shown time and time again, or this type of question, this type of interview, is everyone's different, right? And every kind of interviewer is different too. Because I think I usually end up talking a lot more question based and kind of just trying to talk through things, and then I realize like I haven't done anything technical at all, right? So now I try to make it a conscious effort. But I think it is good to highlight that obviously there's lots of different areas you can go in, which is really helpful.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, back when we did offer this, the range of answers were very surprising. Like, some people nailed the database side of it, right? Other people nailed the product side of it, but no one really got everything, right?
Yeah.
And it actually, in some ways, this problem makes it difficult to really evaluate people if you give them so many different criterias, right? But we were trying to combine a lot into one interview, because I do believe trying to keep things short and sweet with candidates, so that we can get through the process quick and we're respectful of their time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, anything else to share or anything to plug as we come to a close?
No, let's get over with COVID and get back to hanging out and do these in person even.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you being on the show. It's been a blast, and I think insightful for folks, and something that a lot of people really appreciate.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I really appreciate you doing this. I mean, like I had mentioned before, when I got into hiring, I had, no real experience in it, no real business doing it, but you have to learn. And I'm thankful that you're putting this out, for people to, learn and be better at interviewing, because it's definitely something as a technology community that we need to do more consciously and empathetically in the future.
Yeah, empathetically for sure. And I tell people interviewing used to be someone hands you a resume as you're walking into the room, and you go, okay, let's talk about your background, right? Which is, I think, part of the reason why it's a rough industry. But thanks so much. It was a blast.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thank you for watching the technical interview portion of the Professional Technical Interviewee. If you want to tackle this interview question, you can find it at github.com/professional technical interviewee. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Dorsett or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.